Simple Suburban Murder. Tom and Scott Mystery. Book 1. Author Mark Richard Zubro. Publisher St. Martin's Press, New York. Narrator Eric Ost. For Kathy. Chapter 8. They left us in the dark and the dimness from the strip of light at the bottom of the door. I could see Scott. "Are you all right?" Scott asked. "Maybe a couple of bruises. You?" "I'm fine." Scott asked, "Now what, Sherlock?" I appreciated the lack of sarcasm in his voice. "In the story, Sherlock Holmes never got caught and tied up," I answered. "Worse luck for us," he paused, then continued. "If these people killed Evans, they may decide to get rid of us, too." "I know. I'm sorry I got you into this." "I'm glad you did." His smile flashed in the dimness. "You are?" "Yeah, why not? I warned you a million times, but I went along. It's like an adventure." "Thanks. I hope there's a happy ending." "Me too," he said. While trying to get loose, we discussed options and possibilities. We got nowhere with either activity. When finally the door opened, it was John North himself who entered. He turned on a light and shut the door. His first action surprised me. He unshackled us. I rubbed life back into my wrist. When I looked at my watch, I saw we'd been in the room for 2 hours. North leaned his back against the door. He was tall, blond, and blue-eyed. His suit, impeccably cut, hung on him perfectly. He folded his arms over his chest. "Well, gentlemen," his voice was well modulated, pleasing and smooth. "What can I do for you?" I heard neither sarcasm nor humor in his tone. He might have been a polite clerk in an expensive boutique, trained exclusively to be helpful. "Daphne told you everything?" I said. "I have Daphne's version, yes. Now I'd like to hear yours." I told him. He listened attentively. "And so," I summed up, "I think you know where Phil is. I think you have information that could tell who the killer is." Scott spoke for the first time. "We know you're fucking slime from what we saw upstairs." North raised an elegant eyebrow at Scott. He smiled slightly and chose to begin his explanations with Scott's remark. "Did that bother you?" North asked him. "Very much." "And why?" "It was a kid." North chuckled. "But nothing else about it?" "Adults can play whatever sexual games they want, so far as I'm concerned," Scott said. "And you don't think kids play sexual games?" he asked. "Not that kind," I said. But North was partly right. I know people don't like to admit it, but many kids are sexually active. The vast majority of parents prefer to think of their children as living lives of pristine innocence, and this is true for many. But as a school teacher helping troubled kids, I'd heard many stories about them and sex. One sophomore claimed that in 6th grade he kissed all but one of his female classmates, and had been to bed with 4 of them. This didn't count the 7th and 8th grade girls who'd pursued him to orgasm. I found out he wasn't lying a year later from a girl who'd been part of his harem. For the kids, the time between after school and when their parents came home from work gave a new meaning to playtime. "What you're doing up there isn't right," Scott said. North gave him a condescending smile. "I suppose you're right," he said offhandedly. He moved away from the door. I saw Scott ready to leap for the exit. North saw it too. He said, "There's no need for violent heroics. You gentlemen are free to go any time. I'd prefer to explain, and I'm sure you have more questions." Scott gave him a suspicious look. North said to him, "Your little victim upstairs is long gone." He began pacing the room, slowly, hands in his pant pockets. He said, "So, you consider me a completely evil person?" "Goddamn right," Scott said. "Now let's consider what I've done. I've taken the child upstairs off the streets. He is drug-free and has a warm place to sleep. His parents have been contacted and assured he is safe. They didn't care. Neither the mother nor the stepfather wanted him around. 6 months ago, the boy indiscriminately sold himself, living in doorways and alleys. He had syphilis and gonorrhea. I had him cleaned up and kept him that way. At that time, I had him take the AIDS antibodies test. By some miracle, he came out negative. I had him tested again. 2 weeks ago, he was still negative. Now he only does safe sex." He stopped in front of us, hands extended, almost begging for understanding. Tell me, he challenged, what is wrong with that picture? That was one kid, I said. There are other kids we saw on the computer. I've helped every one of them, most not as extensively as my example, but some nearly so. All of them, to some extent. At the very least, they are all drug-free, disease-free, and trained to do only safe sex. People want prostitutes and kinky sex, no matter what the danger. I give it to them safely. It's still wrong, Scott muttered. North looked at me. I said nothing. He sighed deeply and went back to leaning against the door. Maybe he and Daphne considered themselves worthy of good citizenship medals. I didn't. I hadn't changed my mind about him, but then again I wasn't quite as prepared to condemn him as I had been. You have other questions, he said. He quickly began answering, anticipating the obvious. Your main question, of course, is, did I kill Evans? No, I didn't. Do I have an alibi for the night of the murder? One that is sufficient for the police? I'm sure. Beyond that, he paused. I should add that I also don't know who did kill him. Tell me about your relationship with Evans, I said. We were partners. Generally, I supplied the customers while he supplied the workers. We never quarreled up to and including the murder. Our basic values merged wonderfully. We both loved money. I invested mine in my work. I have the impression he gambled his away, although we never discussed his personal finances. I explained to him what I knew about the gambling operation. Doesn't surprise me, he commented. Besides the reputed gambling, he always had a tiresomely new money-making scheme cooked up. He kept trying to tell me about them. I wouldn't listen. Why didn't you join in any of his schemes? I have a great thing going here. I didn't need the pipe dreams of some heterosexual misfit from the suburbs. And you don't have dreams. Mine are coming true. Or don't you read the papers? Your dreams might be about to come down on your head once the police get the information we have, Scott said. Will it? If crime didn't pay, I'd agree with you. But it does pay, and extremely well. More important, my lawyers have been on top of this situation, especially since the murder. If I am mildly inconvenienced, I'd be surprised. Business may suffer for a short while, but it'll come back. People are always willing to pay for sex, and I'm willing to sell. You're that confident you're safe? I asked. You know the police have Evans's computer disk. He laughed. Oh, yes, the magic disk gave us quite a worry for a short time. I don't get it, I said. I suppose you do deserve an explanation. He scratched an ear thoughtfully. It all started the night Evans was murdered. Edgar, who is my right-hand man, met with him around 2 that morning. Out in those frightful suburbs, Edgar is my collector. Evans had only a few $1,000s. He owed us a great deal more. We'd carried him for several weeks. This was not good. He made many promises and offered us a fantastic deal. I might have accepted, but he started making threats. He claimed he had a computer disk filled with information that would ruin me. Edgar knew how I'd react to that, but he was diplomatic. To Evans, Edgar said the threats weren't necessary, and he thought for sure I'd agreed to several of his proposals. Edgar came back here to talk to me. Evans was supposed to show up soon afterward. He never did. The next day when I learned about the murder, I became concerned about the disk and what might be on it. You sent someone to break into the Evans' home, I said. Right. They broke into the house at noon, took all the disks, and came back here. The disks were all ordinary school programs. I had to be sure, so I sent someone dressed as a custodian to look into his room at school. And when they didn't find anything in his classroom, I said, they checked the scene of the murder. They had to, North said. They couldn't be sure. That's when I walked in on them, I said. Yeah, Edgar fired to scare you. He had no orders to kill. So that's who it was, I said. None of the discs we found had anything incriminating on them. We had a copy of the one you found, only without the school information on it. Evans and I kept our data current. That information says nothing about me. I'm safe. Evans' threat was a cheap bluff. How'd you know about the one I have? I asked. That was an unfortunate set of circumstances. I'd like to hear it, I said. Certainly. When Evans died, we notified all our workers of the new arrangement, who'd collect their money, who'd give them referrals. The basics, Scott opened. Yes, among them, of course, was Sheila Davis. It began to dawn on me. You went to visit her that night. She reported that to us. I was out and didn't get the message until the next day. I called her back. She told me about the disc. You mentioned to her. I didn't know if yours was simply a duplicate or the disc Evans said could ruin me. I couldn't take the chance. In the meantime, I had been informed of your meeting with Phil. I was displeased about that, extremely so. Here you were, two people in your do-good mode, getting in my way. Plus you had a disc, maybe a fatal one. That night I sent 2 men to warn you off and get the disc. I wanted to send Edgar, but he was out of town. I sent 2 new men. They screwed it up. I got a beating, I said. And it didn't scare you away, North said. You bastard, Scott said. Business is hell, North responded. You did scare them away. I waited until Edgar got back. I sent him out this evening, around 5 today. He broke into your house. What? Not to worry. He's a pro. He reconnected your security system. He told me nothing was disturbed. He found the printout and a copy of the disc. I went over them quickly, earlier, and more thoroughly before I came down to talk to you. It's only a copy, not new information. I have nothing to fear from Evans, or you for that matter. What if I said there was another disc? I said. There isn't. You're too honest. You'd have said 2 discs earlier when you mentioned giving 1 to the police. We fell silent. I was stumped. Finally, North said, If that's all you gentlemen need tonight, I'd like to go to bed. We got to our feet. I remembered Phil. I asked about him. For an instant, North's calm slipped, but the cool facade quickly returned. The boy was here up until a few nights ago, he said. Here as what? Another poor waif you rescued off the street. Not quite. Did you know who he was? Not at first. Still leaning against the door, he put his hands in his pants pockets, crossed his legs at the ankles, and told us the story. I have major parties here, about once a month. The talented and the rich attend along with the prettiest boys on the street. Daphne is your source for pretty boys, I interjected. Quite often, yes. Where is Daphne? How'd you get her to keep her claws off us? Daphne is marvelous in many ways. We go back many years together. She tends to overreact, especially if she thinks there's an emergency. It is quite easy for me to handle her. I own 75% of the bar. I've saved her from a number of tight spots. She owes me a great many favors. She does as she is told. Oh, I said. Phil came along to the latest party about a week ago now. He had virtues I prize. I didn't ask what those were. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. North continued. He stayed here for a while, as we discussed. He met with you. Then yesterday afternoon he decided to leave. Why? You'll have to ask him that. Where did he go? Where is he now? I don't know. I am generous to my boys. But if they decide to leave, they cease to concern me. He left quite voluntarily. He must have said something. Not to me. To someone? Not that I know of. I explained about the phone calls. North looked genuinely puzzled. He was a kid. Maybe he panicked, North offered. Or maybe someone decided to kill him as they did his father, I said. Perhaps. And it worries me he hasn't tried or been able to call since then. Do your boys live here while you protect them? No. And I see where you're headed. You may not talk to them. You forget we have their addresses from the computer. You forget I have a much stronger hold over them than you do. You must also consider that I am acting benignly tonight. I could choose to be much the opposite. I ignored his threat. Could we look through this place for him? He smiled wearily. If you wish, you'll not find him. If you did happen upon one of the other boys, I guarantee he wouldn't talk. Accepting the fact that he's gone, can't you help us find him? Scott asked. I could, but I won't. Why not? I asked. It's not my problem any longer. If he'd stayed, I'd have taken care of him. He's gone, so too bad. He opened the door for us, holding it politely as we preceded him out. "Why did you tie us up and now let us go so easily?" I asked. "I may be mildly inconvenienced because the police have that disc, but you're no threat to me. Daphne gets too excited. Upstairs, it was better to be safe for the moment. As we got our coats on the third floor, a thought struck me. Who called Mrs. Evans to come find her kid?" I asked. North looked at me curiously. "Sorry. Once again, I don't know, but in all the things you've told me, that seems to be the most strange. By the time we got out of there, it was after 2 a.m. I was bushed. With all this running around, we still hadn't found Phil, and we didn't know who the killer was. We walked back to the car. I think Phil's in that house." Scott's footsteps scraped tiredly as he spoke. "Probably hidden in some tiny corner that we wouldn't recognize in a year's searching." "He may be," I replied wearily. "I feel terrible about Phil." As we waited for the light to change across from the limelight, I said, "I'm not ready to give up." "I'm too tired to go back there and storm the place," Scott said. "We were lucky this time." "I don't want to go back there right now." "Good." We reached the car. I said, "We haven't solved the murder or found the kid." "That we haven't." He patted his pockets, hunting for his keys. "I want to go see Neil," I announced. "Now? At this hour?" He found the keys and unlocked the door. We got in. "Yes, now. He'll be among the queens holding court at the Melrose. They gather there every night when the bars begin to close." "Why do we need to see him? And why now, for Christ's sake?" The street outside was quiet as we sat in the car arguing. I said, "Because we've wasted too much time already. The kid called around this time last night, maybe a little earlier. It's been 24 hours. And whatever's been done to him happened 24 hours ago," Scott cut in. "Probably, but we don't know that." "I'm tired. You're tired. We can catch a few hours sleep at my place. We'll be fresh in the morning." "I have to work in the morning." "Take the day off, or let's wait until after school." "No," I said. "We let the boy go once. We're partly responsible for anything that happens to him." He put the key in the ignition and said, "You still didn't answer me about why Neil." "He's the one I got my basic information on North from. I'm hoping he'll know more." "Tom, that's not a big possibility to go chasing at 2 in the morning." "I know, Scott, but it's at least some hope. I promise it'll be the last stop tonight." "You promise?" "Yeah, I swear by my best pink chiffon outfit." "You don't have a pink chiffon outfit." "So I swear by yours." "I don't have one either." "Scott, start the damn car. Melrose and Broadway." "I know where it is." Neil was there, crammed into the corner booth. Were 5 of them, all in their finest drag outfits. Neil spotted us and waved us over. "You're here for high tea with the queens?" he asked. "We need to see you, Neil." My demeanor must have communicated the urgency and importance of my request. We moved to a back booth so we couldn't be overheard. I told him what happened. His first reaction was, "So, you've been in the sacred precincts. Half the queens in the city would kill for one of his invitations. Plus, you made it all the way to the 3rd floor. I am impressed. Gold stars for both of you." Then Neil launched into an anti-North tirade. I stopped him. I said, "I agree he's a despicable son of a bitch in designer clothes, but we need information, Neil. We've got to find the kid." "If he's out there, I can't help you. He could be anywhere." "What about North?" I asked. "Where does he send his rejects? The boys he's tired of. What happens to them?" Neil hesitated, grumbled low, and looked away. I'd never seen him try to be evasive and distant before. "Nothing happens," he said. His hand shook as he raised his cup of tea for a sip. I'd never seen him lose his cool. "Neil, you've got to tell us." "I can't." "The boy's life could depend on it," I said. "It might," he admitted. Scott and I pleaded and cajoled for 15 minutes. Neil still refused. He said, "John North has power in this city. In the gay community, he knows all and sees all. He has queens begging to be his spies. Anyway, for what I've heard, I have no proof, no certain knowledge, and I don't want it either. If it got out, it could destroy me, a great deal of this community, and of course John North. Please, I explained again what we'd been through, what it meant to us. I added, you want to see him taken down a few pegs, maybe hurt badly. This is your chance. He glanced from Scott to me. All trace of theatrical effeminacy evaporated from his manner. Beneath the makeup, I could see the frightened man. He took out a hanky and wiped it across his upper lip. All right, he said. Neil looked over his shoulder to make sure no one was near, then leaned closer. He said, this information is dangerous, not only for the reasons I said before. I mean for you personally. Be careful with it. These are only rumors, you understand. Of course, I believe them, but that's because I hate John North. He lowered his head and leaned further across the table. He whispered, he makes porno movies, kiddie porn and worse. And worse. Many of his movies have sadomasochistic action. His words were so low that Scott and I were forced to bend almost half over to be close enough to hear. Our three heads were inches apart. Some of the torture scenes were more than acting. And, now his voice was lowest of all, it has been said that on occasion the actors die. My head jerked up. The waitress stood at our table, staring at us curiously. We three looked at her guiltily. Sorry it took so long to get back to you fellas, but a girl's got to have a break, you know. Can I get you boys something? Her gum popped. She scratched inside her beehive hairdo with the tip of her pencil. We ordered coffee. When I was sure she was out of earshot, I whispered, Snuff movies? Are you sure? No. How can he get away with it? Scott asked. If he's doing it, and if he's getting away with it, it is with the complicity of the police and our politicians. You're dead meat if you get near it. If the police don't know, then he'll be even more vicious in snuffing you out to protect himself. Where does all this happen? I asked. I've gone this far, Neil muttered. You'll find out anyway. You'll go there. I'm probably signing your death warrant. I hope you find the place empty and deserted. He told us the address. It was a warehouse on Diversey Avenue, near, I guess, to where it crossed the north branch of the Chicago River. We hurried to the car. Silently, Scott drove down Halstead to Diversey and turned west. No arguments or objections? I asked quietly. We're going to bust up that motherfucker, he vowed. It'll be the two of us. I'm glad you have such faith in our pros. They won't be expecting us. They may not be there at all. He slammed his fist on the steering wheel. How could those bastards be killing kids? I had no answer to that, I said. Even if it's deserted, we may find some clue that will lead us to Phil. We crossed Lincoln Avenue. Remember, it was only a rumor, I said. Do you doubt it? I find it hard to believe. When Neil thinks the worst about someone, he can go overboard. I'm glad you're willing to go tonight. I'd have walked by myself if you hadn't. I know, he said. We rode in silence. I yawned. Whether from nerves or being tired, I couldn't tell. Probably both. In the dashboard light, I saw the grim set to Scott's features. In minutes, we were there. First, we drove slowly around the building. It was a vast, rambling place, a city block wide. The front facing Diversey was all Art Deco. The sides and back a dull yellow brick, interrupted by squares of former windows, totally boarded up from inside. No light shone from the warehouse interior. There were no cars parked outside. No one was on the street. The front entrance was deeply recessed and unlit. Dark shadows hid the door. But rather than risk being seen in the lights of a passing car, we opted for a rear entrance. Scott drove into an alley across from the back of the warehouse. He parked in the deepest shadows. The old factories around us were all dark. To our left was the river. We couldn't see it, but its faint, acrid reek let us know it was there. We paused at the curb under the shadow of a lone oak tree. The faint lights from the side streets wouldn't betray our presence anywhere back here. I didn't realize until much later, but for the next hour we spoke in nothing but whispers. This is breaking and entering, real criminal offenses, I said. Do we have a choice if the kid's in there? Scott asked. No, I don't think so. Calling the police would bring unnecessary delays. North might have clout enough to keep anyone from ever getting inside. He nodded agreement. We looked at each other a moment. We'd been through a lot, but this was a new dangerous and illegal. We grinned at each other. Broken glass gritted under our shoes as we crossed the street and stole across the parking lot. I pointed to the locks on the door. Now what? Plus, they've got to have a formidable security system. No problem, Scott said. He sprinted back to the car. Moments later, the soft click of the trunk closed, penetrating the night air. I watched him dart back. He brought a toolkit and a flashlight with him. In the dimness, he examined the back of the building. Finally, he gave me a reassuring smile. It's a good system, but I can break through. I've installed more complicated ones. All I have to do is... I interrupted. Don't explain, just do it. Okay, he shrugged. You'll have to boost me onto the roof. More eternities than I ever want to spend passed as I waited for his return. The occasional rumble of trucks on Diversey Avenue seeped to the back of the warehouse. In the silence, my breathing seemed louder than a symphony orchestra. Where was he? I glanced from door to roof and back countless times. After 10 minutes, I expected alarms to begin screeching any second. Slowly, the door began to open. Your heart really does stop at heart-stopping moments. Scott poked his head around the opening. Come on, he urged. The alarm's off. I broke through a skylight. Squaring my shoulders, I entered the building. If there was a silent alarm, too, there was no hope for us. We shut the door. The area we were in was completely dark. I let my eyes adjust. A few stray beams of light oozed around corners and through chinks in the boards that covered the windows. It wasn't much, but enough to see. We were in a deserted area that ran the length of the back of the building. Double-locked storage bins loomed opposite from us. They stretched to the distance in both directions. Nothing moved in the vast emptiness, not even the rustle of a rat. I haven't seen anyone, Scott said. He turned on the flashlight. Quickly, he reset the locks on the back door. Uncertain if our light could be seen from outside, we moved quickly to a normal-sized door opposite. The room we entered was an office with a phone desk and filing cabinets. It was windowless. I felt comfortable panning the flashlight around the room. Rapidly, we looked through all the drawers for any hint of a clue. A brief search turned up a few paper clips and 3 crumpled invoices from 1965. We followed the flashlight through the room's other door. We found ourselves walking through a series of deserted stage settings. 3/4 of the building must have been devoted to filming. Cameras and lights cluttered most of the areas. We stepped carefully around them. We made little noise. For the moment, we were lucky amateurs. Each of the areas had a different motif. One, a simple bedroom. One, a prison cell. Another, a 19th century bordello. There were numerous others. We entered a dungeon setting. I went up to the rack. I motioned Scott over. Look, I pointed. Splashed in various parts of the rack was blood. It looks fresh, I said. A harsh clattering noise froze us in our tracks. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.